Sarah Williams. I'm the Programme Director at Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming, and I am lucky enough and privileged enough to be able to urban agriculture and food growing. Oh, hearing some other people, I don't know if they need to be muted. So I'm lucky enough to be overseeing our work on urban agriculture and food growing, and have been here at Sustain for 11 years. Started actually running the Capital Growth Network. So it's a program that's very, very dear to my heart, and I'll be coming back to talk about that in a minute once we've introduced all of my co-speakers. But I just really wanted to give a bit of a backdrop to why we're all here today before I hand over. I was lucky enough to visit Nerima in Tokyo last year for an International Urban Agriculture Conference, and to meet wonderful colleagues that are here today from New York and Toronto. And I've been really delighted that we've been able to stay in touch. But more than this, when the pandemic hit, it was really, truly reassuring to be able to reach out to both of those cities and to see how others and other gardens were responding, and how they were supporting each other, and how we could make the case urban gardens to stay open at this critical time. And I suppose that's how we've ended up here today, because more than ever we think that it's absolutely crucial that we can share our stories and really build our resilience to put our community gardens at the heart of our food resilience. So I'll come back, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this theme much more, but for now I'd like to hand over to Bill, the NYC Parks GreenThumb Director.
Our partners and farmers we're working with to make our gardens and our cities more resilient places. I've served as the director of GreenThumb for 5 years now, and I actually was a community gardener in New York City before I joined the agency. So this is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our work at GreenThumb and learning about what other people are doing. And I'm now going to hand off to my friend and colleague, Rhonda Payne, who serves as the co-coordinator of the Toronto Urban Growers.
Thanks, Bill. Sorry, are we doing our full presentations, or we're just doing little quickie introductions here? Quickie introductions. Okay, hi. Rhonda, I am one of 3 co-coordinators at Toronto Urban Growers, and we're a network of just about every kind of urban grower that you would find in the city of Toronto, from backyard growers to community gardens to organizations that incorporate food programming into their community work, institutions like universities and colleges, and the city. So I'm really thrilled to be here today to hear some of the fabulous panelists we're going to hear from, and to have a couple of wonderful people from Toronto talking as well. So look forward to the conversation. So Sarah, I think you're going to do your presentation first.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry if I misinterpreted our intro section. I blame the time difference. It's nearly the end of our working week over here. So anyway, okay. So yeah, back to me. So just an introduction to Capital Growth. For those of you that don't know about us, we're a network based at the Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. Our wider charity campaigns on food and farming issues are very much at a policy level, and has been around for 20 years. And about 2008, 4 years ahead of us hosting the Olympic Games, there was a really growing demand for allotment space within our city. And a couple of people came up with the idea of setting up a new network, Capital Growth, a sort of play on words around how we could grow more food in the capital. And the initial campaign aim was to set up 2012 new community food gardens in London ahead of the Olympic Games. So we set about going around the city and finding out ways to do that. And I suppose the bigger aim of that was to really make food growing in urban spaces the new normal. We think that urban growing is a tool for health, education, community cohesion, and to sustain in our wider work around food systems. We think it's really critical that people can have the opportunity to engage with food growing, particularly in cities, so that they can see the cycle, recognise the challenges, and really start to engage with debates around food. Next slide, please. So this just shows you a little bit about our trajectory during the first 4 years or 5 years of our campaign, about the amount of land that we converted. I think we compared it to 69 Wembley football pitches, but I think that's well over 120 now. Again, 100,000 people involved. Again, that will have increased. And just some other information and stats there about what we achieved within that first campaign. We've gone on to grow the network and to really build what we do, and to try and consolidate the food growing spaces. We still have lots more members grow, and I think we're up to something like 3,500, although obviously not all of them are active. And if you go to the next slide. So, yeah, as I say, we have around 3,500, and these spaces are really varied. They might be growing productively, such as Keats Organics there in the slide, or they could be much smaller community gardens or spaces in people's back gardens where people are growing together. We also are open to people growing at home, at farms, and everything in between. Gardens join for free, and we do things like training events. We've got a fairly informal relationship with our network. We have put them all on a map. We do lots of London-wide public engagement events, and actually today marks the start of 10 days of online activity for our Urban Harvest Online. So lots of workshops, lots of interesting webinars. So do go and check that out if you're hungry for more at the end of this webinar. If you go on to, so I suppose the other important thing to mention about this slide is the way that we feed into to policy, and really try and create that link between what's going on the ground and to food policy. So things like the London Food Strategy have a chapter on food growing and urban growing, which we very much shape and influence, and things like our publications on edible estates and many other publications out there, which I encourage you again to check out. So I can have the next slide. I suppose one of the really important things that we try to do as a network is to help gardens feel something part of something bigger. We really believe in movements to change, and we aspire to help and to support community food growers as a movement. And that's what our members tell us is most important. Sometimes it's really hard in the day-to-day when you're slogging away, growing in your space, and we have the opportunity to look at the horizon and see what's coming, and also to connect growers together. So things like our Good to Grow Day, which we weren't able to run this year, but we do large participation events across the city, as well as when funding permits, lots of smaller initiatives. So for example, last year we ran Growing Connections, which was about how do you create age-friendly gardens, and we worked with 10 gardens to showcase good practice in that area. And we also ran our Growing Culture project, which was looking at how food growing had really shaped the culture of our city, and how it had brought people from different backgrounds and different nationalities together. So they're just some of the examples of the sort of initiatives that we run. I think as a network, we think it's really important that we can link practical growers with policymakers and really help to shape that policy. I sit on the London Food Board, so I'm constantly there waving the flag for food growers and urban growing and making sure that that's considered in all relevant decisions. So at the moment, I'm really trying to push on access to peri-urban land and seeing how we can take that forward. And also how we can create resilience and give more clout to the physical space, as well as the other practical things that food growers need to think about. So yeah, I think that really holding that organisational knowledge, being able to look back and to see where we've come from, and also to sort of help to set the agenda as where we move forward to is a really critical role of networks, and it's an infrastructure role that we play. One really important thing I wanted to mention, also I think it's the next slide actually, is around our community harvest initiative that we've set up. So in response to lockdown, we had lots of gardens saying we don't quite know what this year holds, but what we do know is we really want to grow food for people that need it. So with funding from the 18 Foundation, we were able to provide support to 50 gardens, 40 of them in London, who wanted to grow food to donate to others. And what's been really interesting about that, we're going to hear from Cloran, who's one of the gardens that took part, is not only growing that food for people, but really the importance that it's had in raising the profile of community gardens within their neighbourhoods, within their local communities, and to building their connection with mutual aid efforts, and really growing the resilience within those neighbourhoods. And we're also delighted that we've just received some additional funding from the London Emergency Response Fund, so we're going to be able to continue the Community Harvest Project for another 6 months, which we think will really help to embed those relationships in those neighbourhoods. Next slide, please. I think this probably is the final one. Yeah, so this is my what next slide. Obviously, nothing ever sits still for a network. We're really trying to catalyse the momentum where we've seen urban growing sort of elevated in terms of its status, and we really want to consolidate and build on that. And we are starting to talk to people, landowners, local authorities, Mayor of London, and to see how we can really apply more pressure to the powers that be and the decision makers when they're looking at planning our cities and looking at land, to see how we really start to take urban growing seriously. We also want to create a movement that supports racial justice alongside other areas of the social justice that we work on. We know that our growers are from a variety of backgrounds, but that also often people of colour may be underrepresented as garden leaders. We're also doing some surveying of our members at the moment, and around a third of those that have responded at the moment feel that their gardens need to be more representative of their communities. So we're seeing how we can support gardens to set up diversity and inclusion user groups, and really try and embed that work in their activities, and seeing how we can really appropriately increase the diversity of those involved in urban growing within our city, looking at issues around food sovereignty, land rights, and garden leadership training. Other things that we are doing is just trying to make sure that access to urban organic veg is not seen as a middle class concern, and so we're looking at how we can increase production on the edge of our cities in our peri-urban area. And I'm delighted that Alice is speaking here today from London. She's got first-hand experience of growing food on the edge of the city and the challenges that brings. And last but definitely not least is how do we bring all this together within the context of a climate and nature emergency. We know that our gardens are hubs of knowledge and resilience for food supply and low carbon living. We want to see that take a centre stage and really give people some agency and seeds of hope. Thank you very much. So I suppose now I do my handing over. This is just a few of our publications. There's many on our website, so do check those out. And now I'm going to hand, I think there's one more slide. And then I'll hand over to Bill. As I said before, Bill's the director of NYC Parks GreenThumb. So we're going to hear some fantastic stuff and some very enviable stuff that you're doing over there in New York.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to hear more about Sustain and what you're working on. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Bill LoSasso, and I serve as the director of NYC Parks GreenThumb. And we are the community gardening organization of New York City government, serving over 550 gardens throughout New York City. And I'm going to share some information about the network of people that really keep community gardens thriving in New York City. And of course, I have to begin my presentation with a quick shot of our team at GreenThumb, and they're the hardest working, most dedicated group of civil servants that you're ever going to find. Next slide, please. And so this is perhaps a funny picture to have in a garden presentation, but I want to begin by acknowledging that not only are the community gardens in New York City responding to the current health and civil rights crisis that we're experiencing, but our garden's very existence came in response to another crisis. New York City of the 1970s and 1980s was in the midst of a financial crisis, and many neighborhoods were suffering from systemic disinvestment that left their built environments looking like this. But the residents in neighborhoods across New York came together and they cleared lots without government help, and they planted gardens and they reclaimed their neighborhoods. And so it really was these gardening pioneers who responded to that crisis, and it's these same visionaries who you're going to hear from today who are responding to the crises that we're having right now. Next slide, please. And so GreenThumb was established in 1978 to support this urban gardening movement that had already arisen of its own volition in New York City. And since the land where most gardens operate now is preserved under the Parks Department, we provide licenses to groups of neighbors so that they can steward gardens that are active resources for their communities. And I should add that all community gardeners in New York City are volunteers, and they serve their communities in this unique way because we believe that a city with community gardens is a better place, and I think everyone on this call would definitely agree. And so our job at GreenThumb is to provide free support to gardeners to help them realize their vision for their garden. And we do this in a couple ways. We provide free materials and labor, and during the pandemic, we were especially proud to be able to provide 45,000 free food-producing plants directly to gardeners to make sure that they stayed safe, but also had the ability to keep growing and feeding their communities. We provide community engagement support to connect New Yorkers with gardens and gardeners and get them engaged in the work that we're doing. And this is part of a larger strategy to help support leadership and membership in gardens, and to make sure that gardens membership is representative of the communities where they're located. We also do pretty robust public programming. We have an annual conference, which is the largest in the United States, and we have our Harvest Fair end-of-year celebration that's coming up next Saturday. And we host 150 free workshops every year, which are increasingly co-led by our community gardeners who, let's face it, they know best how to garden in the harsh urban environment of New York. So they have a lot to share, and we want to make sure that we're working with them to share their knowledge and their wisdom and their expertise. And lastly, we advocate within government at GreenThumb to make sure that we're getting as many resources for gardeners as we can. Next slide, please. And so today, GreenThumb and 20,000 volunteer gardeners collectively support a network of 550 gardens on 100 acres of land across the city, and that's 40 hectares for our friends outside of the States. And almost all of our gardens grow food, and that's an increasing trend, especially in response to the COVID crisis. And so we estimate that GreenThumb gardeners grow well over 500,000 pounds of fresh fruits and vegetables every year. Now, 70% of GreenThumb gardens are located in neighborhoods with below average fruit and vegetable consumption. And 40% of gardens don't have a store that sells fresh fruits or vegetables within a half mile. So gardens are an incredibly important source of food and nutrition for many individuals and families across New York City. And on top of supporting individual access, about 100 gardens distribute food in some way into their communities, whether it's through a farm stand or donations to food pantries or through a CSA program that they run themselves. Next slide, please. But with such a large and productive network, like I've tried to explain, we also rely on over 100 external partners to support this thriving community of gardens in New York City. Each partner has different resources and expertise, of course, but we're all part of a symbiotic relationship of gardeners and government and nonprofit and community-based actors, and we're all working together to support and sustain the community gardening movement in New York City. And one recent example of this partnership is this recent garden build that occurred with our partners at Grow NYC, who are a nonprofit who have actually supported gardeners with over 100 new garden builds over the years. And when we're working together, that frees us up to work on other things. Next slide, please. And this really expansive network has been especially important during the COVID crisis, as we've all really tried to work together and maximize our support for gardeners on the front lines of supporting food access in so many communities. So a recent example is we had the Green Gorillas, who's another nonprofit that we work closely with, provide free food plants to gardens, while the Brooklyn Botanic Garden supported gardens with 5,000 seed packets, which then GreenThumb worked with them to pick up and distribute to gardens throughout the city. You can see Janae from our team loading her car up with boxes of seed packets that then made its way to our growers across the city. And then another partner, the New York Restoration Project, helped us expand the growing capacity in the existing garden by building new planting beds during the pandemic to, again, increase food production. And so we're all really working together in common cause and to be able to get the resources to gardeners who are then able to feed New Yorkers. And last slide, please. And so to me, it's always important to kind of end where I began, and that's in recognition of the founders of our network, and that is really the amazing community gardeners of New York City. Here's a wonderful shot of the great group at Campos Community Garden in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And our gardeners have been stewarding these spaces that feed people and build community and support healing, especially now, and make New York ultimately a better place. And you're going to get a chance to hear more about their amazing efforts from Karen and Mark in just a little bit. But before that happens, I am going to pass the mic to Rhonda in Toronto and hear about the amazing things that the Toronto urban growers are doing. Thank you, and Rhonda, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Bill. I talked a little bit about Toronto urban growers and the network we are, but I think it's important for me to say that TUG is an unincorporated network. So about in 2009, a bunch of urban farmers and gardeners came together because they were facing similar challenges. They're looking at access to land has always been very difficult in Toronto. Policy barriers to starting new projects, regardless of what kind of project you're starting, but also just a desire to connect with each other and learn from each other. And that is, it's still the same. The issues are still the same. And I think one of the things that is even more relevant now, in what Bill and Sarah have referred to, is access to land specifically for people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Take the next slide, please. Thanks, Mara. So when we talk about the kind of work that we do, COVID and the incidents of police violence towards Black and Indigenous people have really highlighted a few things for us. So creating a platform for people that have not always had access has always been a focus for TUG. I joined the Toronto Urban Growers partly because I was going to events where I would see people from the downtown core speaking all the time, white people, people from organizations, and I knew that there was this range of growing that was happening in the suburbs. From people from all over the world were sharing their knowledge of growing with people in their community, and we needed to bring that forward. So a lot of the knowledge exchange that we do, a lot of the resources that we provide are all geared towards trying to bring some of those voices forward. And you can't see my shirt, but I'm representing Black Creek Community Farm, one of the great organizations in Toronto doing that kind of work. So next slide, please. Great. So to talk a little bit about what inequalities look like in Canada that we've just become very much aware of now, the BIPOC people, so we know the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color acronym, are disproportionately affected by food security issues. Black households in Canada are about 3.5 times more likely to experience food insecurity than white households. And now we're seeing that the neighborhoods in Toronto that have concentrations of people of color, low-income residents living in high apartment towers, these are the ones who are most affected by COVID, both infection and death rates. So that's made it really clear that the inequalities are becoming more concentrated. And also, in the context of Canada, and I'm sure this is in the United States as well, we've been gradually learning the painful truth of our history of and current treatment of Indigenous peoples. So the attempts to stamp out their culture entirely, to move people off the land, and continuing under-resourcing of Indigenous communities. The current police violence towards Black and Indigenous people has, again, raised incredible awareness of this. And I would say the other thing that COVID specifically has done, people become more aware of how vulnerable our food system is, and how inadequate it's been for both providing food for everyone in a city, but also specific communities. So people are really looking at ways to grow food for themselves, but they also want to grow food for their neighbors. So from the awareness that came from this, there has been some renewed energy to work on some solutions and to do a deeper systematic change. I have to say that the BIPOC people in our community, and I think worldwide, have been very good at holding people who want to be considered allies accountable. So we're trying to move beyond this performative allyship, saying with lots of talking, lots of clicking on likes, internet stuff. And how do we move to the walking? How do we make sure that we're making true systemic change? So there are some amazing resources out there that are very thought-provoking, and our job as Toronto Urban Growers has been trying to help get that out to the community and bring that to life a little bit, to think about how do we decolonize our thinking, how do we decolonize our practices. And a lot of that is about taking back control of the food system. So gardeners have always been about growing their own food, growing food that matters to them, growing the food that's healthy for them. And so how do we create more opportunities specifically for Black and Indigenous people to do that? And a lot about that is supporting food projects that are led by Black and Indigenous people. So not just saying, okay, we're a white-led organization that's going to welcome you into our project. It's about how do we support projects that are showing Black leadership. Indigenous placemaking and earthworking is experiencing a bit of a renaissance. It's an uphill battle, but we're seeing a lot of that. You're going to hear from Isaac about some of the pardon the pun, groundbreaking work that he's doing, ground nurturing work that he's doing. And so when Indigenous people are able to plant their traditional food and medicine gardens, not only does it promote healing and rebuild the teachings and practices that were almost lost in their community, but these are also very visible things. This is what's really important about community gardens, is they're usually in public places, people see them. It creates this visibility that hasn't always been there, and opportunity for learning. And I think that's true whether you're talking about any kind of marginalized population, whether you're talking about people with disabilities. You see a picture here of Opal Sparks is an incredible mover and shaker in our garden world here. And the other thing is that in this slide is this is Alan Colley, who is leading a walk on harvesting salmon. So he took us on a walk where he fished for salmon in the Humber River in the west end of Toronto, right in the urban area, and cleaned the fish for us. And that's all about talking about traditional food practices. And so now I think this is expanding our idea of what urban agriculture actually is. It's not just about growing plants, but food plants, but it's about medicines. It's about harvesting fish, and then building a deeper relationship with the environment. I think is one of the biggest things that we're learning now. Okay, I can go on to the next slide because I want to make sure I talk about our experience here with COVID has been a really great example of the power of collaboration and working as a network. So in March, when the lockdown happened here in Canada, the City of Toronto and the province closed down our community gardens. They said these are recreational facilities, they don't need to be open. So our fight was to get them recognized as essential food services. And this happened both at the municipal level, this happened at the province, and involved some really amazing collaborations between organizations in Toronto, provincial networks, the Toronto Food Policy Council, and the City of Toronto Public Health. So it took all of these different actors working together to get the gardens reopened in May and to create a set of guidelines to make that possible to do safely. Again, community gardeners just by themselves, or even the City of Toronto alone, that would not have happened. It's because the network happened broader. And I think it showed the importance of networking organizations like Toronto Urban Growers and the Toronto Food Policy Council that act as a bridge between community organizations and city staff. You know, we're all working towards very similar broader goals. We want to green the city, we want to reduce poverty, we want to build strong neighborhoods. But because cities and a lot of community organizations work at very different scales, they have very different operating environments, they don't always understand each other's realities. So to have organizations that build that bridge in between is really critical for making those connections and working together. So the slide I'm showing you here sounds like it's totally different. It's here to remind me of a couple of things. So I think like Bill and Sarah both mentioned, gardens are really great places for leveraging citizen action. Cities, as many resources as they have, even organizations, cannot accomplish what they do without bringing residents into this. And this is an example of two organizations I'll mention quickly, Food Share and the Packed Peace program. They do a program where on their urban farms, they welcome residents to bring food scraps to create compost that goes into building the soil for the farms. And then the citizens get coupons for the market where the produce is grown. So talk about a circular economy here. This is bringing people in, they're supporting the farm, they're also getting access to good food. So I think it's a brilliant example of this. And I think it's an important message at this time because I think we're all seeing with COVID that we may feel like we're losing ground on some environmental issues. When you see people throwing out masks and gloves all over the place, and we get our food in packages, and that it's pre-prepared, it's kind of dead food, it's not fresh produce, all in the name of safety. We have to say, whoa, wait a minute, we cannot lose the ground that we've been making on climate change, on waste reduction, on creating circular economies. And it's projects like these ones by Food Share and Pact that help us to remember and to keep that on track. And so now I think, next slide, please. I'm going to wrap up just by putting in a plug here for our own Urban Agriculture Week, which is on right now. I've been running around the city looking at seeing all of these wonderful projects. It's not as intense as it's been in previous years because, of course, we can't have large gatherings in the same way that we have before. But there are a lot of smaller gatherings that are happening, and of course the online presence is there, and so that means for those in New York and London and beyond, if you want to get some inspiration when the snow starts blowing in all of our cities, you can check out the website, which I will put in the chat box. This started as a way to communicate the importance of food growing, not as a recreational activity, but as a food sovereignty and food security initiative by Letitia Devo from Black Creek Urban Farm, Black Creek Community Farm. And we're still trying to use tools like Urban Agriculture Week to get out that message to funders, to decision makers, and just to residents to make this happen. So, okay, that leads me to the absolutely wonderful pleasure of introducing you to a totally fabulous woman who's going to be our moderator today. Milena, I know from her work in the Toronto Food Policy Council, the Toronto Youth Food Policy Council, and now she is the chair of Food Secure Canada, so she has a lot of background with nonprofit organizations, but also she used to work for city councilors, so she knows the frontline action of making change at city level. So the the chair of the Food Policy Council, after Milana had done her presentation, said, you know, I love Milana, concise, full of content. So with that, welcome Milana, and thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be moderating this discussion with some incredible panelists. So let's get down to it to ensure we have a lot of time for questions and engagement. First up, we have a panelist from New York City. It's Karen Washington, who will be talking about the Bronx Community Farm Hubs. And just to give a little bit of introduction, Karen is a co-founder of the Black Urban Growers. She's a co-owner of Rise and Root Farm, and she has been recognized widely for her leadership in urban agriculture. In 2014, as a winner of the James Beard Award, she is someone who has stepped up in many moments of challenge. And so I'm really excited to kind of lead the conversation with her. So thinking of just Karen to kind of open up, founded in 1988, you helped start one of the oldest New York Botanical Garden Bronx green up gardens in the city, and have really kind of helped think through a model of how these gardens could really support local residents. So growing lots of produce. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this initiative has supported residents in this challenging time, and in what ways you guys have been able to pivot in this moment of COVID-19?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So I want to bring into the fact that, first of all, hopefully, one day we'll have a conversation really around food and social justice, because prior to the pandemic, I live in the Bronx. Out of 62 counties in the Bronx, 62 counties in New York State, the Bronx ranked 62 as the most unhealthiest. And so this pandemic has really brought to the forefront so many health disparities that we've had in terms of food insecurity. And so when you deal with city agencies, sometimes they tell you what you can and cannot do. But we as gardeners are, resilient, and we find solutions of what we can do. And so even though there were restrictions in terms of the amount of people who were entering our garden, we got together and said, look, we know how to grow food. We know the impact that this virus is having on our community. We have to do something. And so got on a phone call with 10 community gardens in the Bronx, along with Bronx GreenThumb, to really sort of get people together and talk about what do we need to do? What do we need to do? Because this is affecting our community. And so the first thing we did, because again, there were rules and regulations on how to proceed in terms of growing food and making sure food was getting to our community. The first thing we did was call the health department and set up a webinar. We set up a webinar with the health department because we didn't want the city to come and say, you're breaking the rules and regulations. So we went to the heart, which is the health department, and had a webinar so they know exactly how to proceed, wearing the mask, hand washing, 6 feet distancing, all these protocols that we had in place. And then we started coming together to talk about how we're going to set up either farmers markets, CSA, farm stands, and got together and had bi-weekly calls to talk about exactly what are some of the resources that we need, what are some of the education that we need, how were we able to go out within our community and let them know that in spite of this epidemic, this pandemic, that we are here to feed the communities. And another thing that we did, which is really, really important, is that we stepped up and started partnering with food pantries and soup kitchens, which is really, really critical. Granted, we live in a food system that is subsidized and charity-based, but this is a time when they're stepping up to feed the people in our community. And the community wants to see people with our faces that are growing food that's culturally appropriate, food that we know that we need for nourishment, because at the end of the day, this pandemic is going to affect the most marginalized people, which are usually people of color. And so we're out there every week. I help run a farmers market, the La Familia Verde Farmers Market, which was started back 18 years ago because we were told that people in low-income neighborhoods don't want to have access to fresh produce, that fresh produce is elitist, that it's expensive, and that farmers don't want to come into our neighborhoods. So the community garden movement has been at the forefront, making sure that people have access to food, because at the end of the day, food is a human right for all. Did I answer your questions?
You most definitely did. Thanks for kicking us off with a really powerful start to thinking about the role that community gardens can play in this moment and about who we need to prioritize and thinking outside the box. So I'm really excited to welcome our next speaker, Marc Legere. I'm just really going to kind of really build on a lot of the things that Karen said. You know, we realized that long before COVID, access to fresh, affordable food was a daily challenge for many neighborhoods, particularly in Brooklyn and the Bronx. You know, the pandemic has really shed a light on the issue of food insecurity and also about the challenge of getting food in these communities. So, Marc, I'm really, you know, as a community garden, the Phoenix Community Garden, growing nearly 2,000 pounds of food for the community, recently featured in the National Geographic because of some of the incredible organizing and supports you've been able to provide to seniors. Can you tell us how the Phoenix Community Garden has been able to support residents in this really challenging time? I think we're just waiting for Marc there.
I needed to unmute myself. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Hi, everybody. Shout out from Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, I wanted to lead off with this photograph, which I find just incredibly moving. It was taken on March 22nd of this year. 2 days prior, on Friday, March 20th, Governor Cuomo had announced shelter-in-place restrictions. And this is us gathering 2 days later to plant pansies in the garden as a real expression of hope and the power of our community. And you have a visual sense of how our garden is, the kind of context of kind of old Brooklyn row houses and then a half-acre lot that we use now as a garden. And previously it had businesses and row houses. And during the disinvestment of the 70s and 80s that Bill LoSasso referred to, it fell down, basically. So if we couldn't show the movie, Mara. So while we're waiting for the movie to start, basically it's a short 30-second video that Victoria Guillem, who's on this webinar, made. And it's about our Elder Box program, which is a mutual aid effort to get fresh food and produce to our elders. And we made our first delivery on March 28th. 6 days after that photograph was taken.
My name is Marcia Denson. I'm one of the founders of Phoenix Community Garden. We decided to start the Elder Box program when the virus started, trying to help our neighbors, elderly neighbors, the ones that are always to supply fresh fruits and vegetables to them. We've got really positive feedback from our seniors and
So I'm now unmuted, I think. As you can tell from the video, we're a pretty large garden by New York City standards. We're located in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, which has a proud activist history. If people want to read about the Ocean Hill, Brownsville teacher strike of 1968, it's pretty powerful and pretty fascinating. According to the Robin Hood Foundation, the rate of food hardship in our neighborhood is 60%. There are a couple supermarkets, but the produce selection is limited and the quality is bad. So we're really, it's a case study in food apartheid. At the same time, the neighborhood is gentrifying, causing rent pressure that effectively cuts the food budgets of the longtime residents. We already had infrastructure for year-round food distribution thanks to the Fresh Food Box program, which is like a weekly CSA, but instead of sourcing from a single farm, Grow NYC Wholesale, which is the distribution arm of the agency that runs the farmers markets, aggregates produce from a lot of different regional farms. And we do that year round. So, as soon as the virus hit, we were able to kind of start getting food out to the community, to people who needed it, free of charge. Even though business dips in the winter and early spring, we still had 40 people coming to pick up their produce every week, and they immediately started asking, how can we help? Do you need any money? So we were able to operate thanks to the financial support and the volunteer support from the community that we were basically in weekly contact with. This is our farm stand, not in March. And as Karen talked about, we've been operating this for about 2 or 3 years. Karen was actually our mentor. A couple of us went to a workshop she did at the Grow together on starting a farm stand. And this has, become a central hub to our neighborhood. At this point, we're distributing 96 food boxes every week, 72 elder boxes, and we have another 30 to 50 people who come to shop what we call a la carte, just buying individual items. The line begins to form 15 minutes before we open at 11, and sometimes people can wait 40 minutes to get to the counter, which we're trying to speed up, but it just kind of shows the demand for what we're doing, and also kind of real capacity issues that I think need to be solved on a citywide level. Can we show the EVT slide? So our newest effort is, we, through the profits of the farm stand, we're able to offer fresh food boxes for $7 that would normally cost $14. And that's for people who pay by EBT, which I don't know what the analogs would be in the UK or Canada, but it's food stamps or SNAP. And that program has really taken off as, people are really hurting with the high unemployment rates and the cut in benefits. So we're happy to be able to offer this new thing, which we've been doing for about 3 weeks now. So that's what I wanted to show you. I want to reiterate that we're able to do this because we are so grassroots and outward facing as a community garden. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciated kind of how Mark opened up to lay out that community gardens have an opportunity to be more than just food security vehicles. They also are key tools to build social community connection and mutual aid, and also signs of hope working together. So this next presenter from the UK is going to be talking, it's Killeran, I'm saying this right, Killeran O'Leary, from the Global Generation, who will be speaking about the Story Garden's involvement in the community harvest and other COVID response efforts. And just to give you a little bit about the Story Garden, it's located outside St. Pancras Station, so really in the heart of London, and they were able to make use of an empty space of land surrounded by schools and by social housing, to really think about how do we connect land-based activities to build relationships and support not only between community, but also between community and the local environment. And so I'm hoping Killeran can really tell us more about this philosophy of building relationships and how that informed how you built resilience with local communities during this period. Killeran?
Hiya. Hello, I'm from Story Garden, and we're part of Global Generation, and we've been in King's Cross, which is in central London, really, really busy part of town since 2004. So we're a community and education garden focusing on food growing and nature connection and social cohesion. And this picture you can see here is of one of our skip gardens, And we grow vegetables and wildflowers and fruit trees because they're portable and they're movable. And that's because our gardens have had to move around King's Cross as the area undergoes a decade-long gentrification process. And we've slotted into spaces which aren't being used or are earmarked for developments. And our newest garden is Story Garden. If I could have the next slide. We're on a bit of land behind the British Library in Somerstown, still in King's Cross, which is a really densely populated area, mostly made up of social housing, blocks of flats, and is one of the most socioeconomically deprived wards in Camden. And so we started growing this garden last year, and there's lots of space where local residents own their own beds and grow their own veg, and then the rest of the space we used to grow food for our lunches with schools coming to us and families. But when COVID came along and we had to go into a lockdown, it really caused us to have a look at what we were doing and confirm what our priorities were. And we had to temporarily shut and make sure that the garden was safe and make sure we were protecting everyone in the community, particularly because Somerstown has a high prevalence of heart disease and diabetes, which we know puts us more at risk of COVID. And so we looked at how we could still bring the garden home and stay connected to people, whilst acknowledging that digital divide and the fact that lots of local residents don't have access to devices that they can do Zoom workshops on. So we were creating activity packs, seed packs, planter packs, all written in Bengali and Somali, as those are the most commonly spoken languages, along with English. And then at the same time, we gave over a lot of our space, as much as we could, to up the production of vegetables, and started linking up much more closely with the two food banks right next door to us. And so Sustain's Community Harvest Initiative really helped us with that. And we got a bit of seed funding to also that effort that we'd already been doing. It was really motivating as well to see other community gardens in London, big and small, kind of rallying together around the same effort to grow more veg for the communities in London being hit the hardest by COVID, and to be linking up with food banks and make sure that everyone has access to nutritious food. So looking at the future, we now feel that actually working with the food bank and Rashida and her team, who unfortunately couldn't join today, that's part of our long-term vision now, and also looking at how we can shake up the status quo with the food bank. So we are looking at a food scheme now rather than a food bank that focuses on creating a community shop or a larder, which is subsidised for some shoppers, but creates choice in the shopping experience and dignity in the food shopping experience, and at the same time creates jobs in the shop, as well as horticulture qualifications and training for young people that we work with locally in the garden, who are then helping us to grow veg for the community shop. So I think thinking about resilience in this local food economy, it needs to be underpinned with creating jobs and access to employment, particularly for groups that are underrepresented in urban food growing in London.
Thank you, Killer. And it was really awesome to hear thinking about resilience is going even beyond the garden, and how do we think about creating real sustainability and economic supports for people who are really hurting. So I'm really excited to bring forth our next presenter, Alice Holden, from the growing community of Dagenham Farm. So this farm is based in Hackney. The Dagenham Farm is an organic-based farm that's just outside of London and in the outer parts of London, and it's really working to support residents through the sale of locally produced produce. and has an innovative kind of food and farming approach, thinking about how communities help to shape this vegetable and fruit scheme that they're providing. So Alice, welcome, and can you tell us a little bit more about how your initiative has really helped support communities in the various neighborhoods in and around London?
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
okay?
we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, Milana. Thanks for the intro. So yeah, we grow 1.77 acres of fresh, sustainable, organic fruit and veg. As you said, on the edge of London. And I'm part of Growing Communities, which is a not-for-profit organisation that tries to feed urban communities in a fair and sustainable way. I'm one of their farmers, so I'm the head grower at Dagenham Farm, which is in quite a deprived part of Zone 5 of London, so not central London, but on the periphery. The organisation itself is made up of lots of parts. It has a patchwork farm in Hackney, which is more central. It has a trade model to support sustainable farmers in and around the city to help them supply urban populations with food, which is basically made up of a box scheme and farmers market. And then there's the Better Food Shed, which is its distribution hub, which also supplies about 12 other box schemes around the city. So I'm just one of the growing sites that makes up the whole of this organisation. So as a farmer, when the pandemic struck, our farm had to respond quite quickly. The main initial thing we had to deal with was the restaurants stopped ordering, and they're about a third of our income. Though the farm is part of not-for-profit, we have to, like any farmer, I have to grow quite a large amount of produce to make ends meet and keep the farm going. So that was a big issue in terms of our income and keeping the project going. So first thing I did was rechanneled as much of the restaurant produce over to our box scheme, and they take everything I have each week. So for me as a farmer, that's incredibly helpful, and it means we have resilience with shock, and they pay us a fair price. And the council then got in touch with us, and they were able to fund buying some of our produce for local vulnerable and isolating people within the borough. And it was great because they were paying us to provide the healthiest kind of food directly to the people who most needed it. And the Better Food Shed distributed that for us, which was incredible. And in terms of the income, I still had this hole from the restaurants, and I just started thinking about my locality. What was my network? What was the geography of between where I work and where I live? And they're quite near each other. And I WhatsApped the parents at the children's centre where my daughter was, and within about half an hour I had the restaurants orders replaced by families ordering veg, which I then delivered directly, which were all super local to where I lived. And it made me feel incredibly valued as a food producer. And suddenly, I think, faced with deficit, everyone rethought their relationship to food, which was really fantastic in a way. People have maybe changed the way they eat and feel about local food. So I started doing the deliveries to the local families, and then had an idea to the local children's centre was also supplying vulnerable families with food, and I did a sort of coffee cup scheme, allowing or asking if the people ordering veg bags would also buy a veg bag for a vulnerable family, and the response was really heartening. It was a really bleak time in London. It was really, lots of ambulances, and it was just very distressing what was happening around us. But the response locally was very heartening, and people wanted to do as much as they could to support people that they didn't know often. The farm in Dagenham, historically, we've had it open to lots of the community, and it's a very important place. It's incredibly important because it's so accessible, because we're in London and we're surrounded by millions of people, and it's easy to access. However, when the pandemic happened, in terms of safety and keeping a lot of our vulnerable volunteers safe, we actually decided to shut our doors to our volunteers, which was really upsetting in lots of ways, because it's so much part of what I do. And I suppose in terms of the future, my big question is, it's not my land, it's land that's very important because of where it is, and it should be open to the communities around it. And the question is how, as a farmer, I manage to open that up in a responsible and safe way without extra funding to do that. And at the moment, we don't have the funding for any outreach. But I'm very keen to try and make that happen as soon as possible. And in terms of resilience, in terms of crops and what we grow, it was really tested, our model as an organisation. The trade model proved to be, of the box scheme, proved to be the most resilient system of supplying our communities when the pandemic happened. And for me as a farmer, it kept the farm going. So it's how I can channel more food into the box scheme, which has an affordable bag for people. So it's hopefully affordable to lots of people who wouldn't have access to that kind of produce otherwise. And biodiversity-wise, in terms of resilience, I think to keep the farm growing lots of different kinds of crops is so important, because with ever-changing climate and ever-changing world around us, it just gives it more resilience. If something fails, we'll have something else to rely on. But ultimately, it's really galvanized me to understand the importance of local food. Obviously, I knew that before. I wouldn't do what I do, but it's really like reinforced that for me. And my big question is how we sustain making food accessible to those who have released. And we did that during the pandemic with extra funding from the council. So I think it's part of it's top-down solutions, but a large part of it is by growing it next to where those people live so they can access it, and making it easier for them to access it. And that's what I hope for the future for the farm.
Great, thanks, Alice. So I'm just going to bring us right back across the Atlantic here in Toronto, and not to play favorites, but I'm very excited to hear our next two speakers. First, I want to welcome Jessie Nya from Zawadi Farm. Zawadi Farm really prides itself in using regenerative practices, organic practices that think about soil quality, care, and nutrition of the land. And so as the farm manager, I'd love to hear from you, Jessie, about how you've used these regenerative resiliency kind of approaches to the land to be able to nourish and build relationships with the community, particularly with the Thistletown community in West Toronto. Turn it over to you, Jessie.
My name is Jessie, and I live in Toronto, and originally from Kenya. And 4 seasons ago, I switched from my world of technology and pivoted completely into urban farming. And Zawadi Farm was formed, with a thought that we're going to do a lot of, good work bringing food into our community. And our first initial year was actually a very difficult one, because it was a huge wake-up opportunity for me to see that food is not equal across the board, especially in a farmer's market environment, because when people come to buy food, you have those who can and those who cannot. And it was such a difficult journey to start with that. And the land that I got the first year was actually a gift. And a friend of mine, a neighbor actually, had about 7,500 square feet of empty space full of pallets. And he said, if you want a farm, here you go, take it and use it for free. And I was kind of flabbergasted how that it was possible, but there's some good gems in our city. And we rehabilitated the place, took all the pallets out, put in some fresh compost, and we were growing quite a good amount of food there. And in the farmers market, what we found out again was, what we were trying to sell, not a lot of people could afford, and it was such I don't know how to explain, but it was kind of painful because I knew people who wanted food, but I couldn't get to them. So I started doing something weird where anyone who came to my market and said, I can find your kale cheaper at a grocery store, I can find your beets cheaper somewhere else, I started giving them my food. So instead of selling it, I was giving them. So everyone who came and said, listen, your potatoes are, I gave them. This are your kale are, I gave them. And I said, listen, come back next week and yell at me again next week on where you can find better food than this. And it was a huge success because everyone who came back after that did not converse with me about, I can find food cheaper somewhere else. They actually were more of where can I find more of this? But what I found out what I could do was that the income I received from that year was not really adequate, wasn't fantastic, but it allowed me to do and build a community market. So what I did was I started growing over and above what my CSA members, so to speak, have, and I switched that to how we can take the funds that we receive and any money that we make excess, we take the produce that's extra, we take it to a community market, and we subsidized it really, really, really hard. So it became very accessible to a community. So the land was really important for us because that's where we got everything from it, and just rehabilitating all that. And when people started seeing what we're doing with the backyards, they started giving us extra backyards. So in the presentation you're looking at now, the slide you're looking at, when we first started, yes, the land was pretty short. 7,500 square feet wasn't that much for us to grow adequately, but actually was quite a bit. And the second year we had 25 to 30 CSM members that we started off with. Those are community farmers, community supporters that came in to help us with buying our vegetables. And 4 years in right now, we are sitting at 70 members that we feed consistently, and we harvest weekly about 9 to 11 to 12 crops a week that we harvest and move to our CSA community, and any excess that we have that we've harvested that's over and above that, we bring it to our low-income community and we subsidize it heavily. And that has been our journey since, and it's been very exciting to be part of it. And that's the picture of my one of the backyards we're using, and that's my backyard actually. And we grow this greenhouse is 50 feet long, and we have about 10 beds, raised beds that we put in there. And the reason why we put raised beds is because Canada does get cold, and it's very hard to have shoulder seasons during at the end of winter. So what we do now is we put in a lot of compost, and that greenhouse in itself can feed about 25 CSA members just by itself. And so we're trying to build that and continue doing that and build it further. And there are many more backyards that are opening up, coming up in the next season. Hopefully we'll have, right now we're sitting at a half an acre of collectively of backyards that we've rehabilitated. And we're looking at acquiring an extra half an acre of backyards coming up in 2021 that will bring us to an acre of urban city spaces that we can start farming. And any produce that we do, of course, goes to our members, and then any excess we have goes into a community. And we're opening up as many community markets as we can and investing in our youth that are going to take over the market. And then over and above that, we're also opening up our microgreens. That's where I'm in right now, microgreens operation. And that's the photo on the bottom left. And that one is that's during the winter because we shut down for the winter and we focus solely on microgreens over the winter season. And both the same equation. We sell it to our members, and any excess goes back to community. And I think my time is up. I'm not trying to take over too much time.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Jessie. So exciting to hear about a completely different way to not only show solidarity and understanding with folks in the community who, have a lot of ideas about what organic or regenerative practices mean and it being out of their reach, but try and also share some of the values. So I'm really excited about our next speaker, Isaac Crosby, who is the lead hand at the Evergreen Brickworks, and he's supporting the Indigenous Urban Agriculture Garden there. I'm excited for a couple of reasons, because I think Isaac really does bring, we heard a little bit about how Jessie brings, his experience coming from abroad here and kind of the shock, but I think Isaac also brings his history and traditions to his work, identifying as a Black and Ojibwe ancestry. I think Isaac really brings a unique set of practices and principles to his work at Evergreen Brickworks to indigenize those lands there and bring back land stewardship traditions that in many ways have been lost in growing here in Toronto. And I really just want to say that, this is particularly important to see leadership from folks like Isaac and from Jessie, because here in Toronto, we see food insecurity similarly to New York and likely in the UK of Black and Indigenous peoples at 3.5 times the rate of white folks who are living here in the city. So how can we, really cultivate leadership among Black and Indigenous folks in the agriculture space is really special. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Isaac, to tell us more about your unique approach to land cultivation and how you've really built resilience in the lands in the Don Valley. Isaac.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? So right now I'm outside in my garden, actually at Evergreen Brickworks. So if you look behind me, you'll see some of the garden. I'm going to switch the camera around. So me being here at Brickworks, I've been here for 4 years. I just started doing my own thing, and one day they asked me if I could take over one of the garden spots that was looking kind of bad, I should say. And so I said, okay, sure, as long as I have autonomy over it and I can do what I need to do inside these gardens. So me being me, coming from the Ojibwa of Andreton in southwestern Ontario, we're farmers. So I got my hands inside here, so I had to show people how to rejuvenate this land. So the first thing for the gardens here was doing sunflowers. I did sunflowers, some sunflower mounds to rejuvenate the soil, get the soil back together, and then just started doing Indigenous agricultural techniques. That was one thing that was actually really, really missing here at Brickworks. So when I started doing it, I got a lot of pushback. I won't lie. I got pushback because everyone tried to tell me how to garden. People tell me I'm gardening wrong. And I think, nope, I'm actually gardening right. I'm gardening right compared to my ancestors. The way we're gardening now, I think, is wrong, but we can incorporate it. So in my gardens, what I do is I have one section that is Indigenous gardening. So there's 3 sisters. I do 3 versions of the 3 sisters. And another section of the garden is European gardening. All right? So when it comes to food resilience, I mean, just me being here is resilient. Just me showcasing what my people do here is resilient. And having garden beds, like look behind here. Having this in the middle of Brickworks, which is in the middle of Toronto, is something that is amazing because you don't really find it in the middle of Toronto. I mean, we're in the valley where there should be corn growing, where there should be a lot of food growing, but there's not. So being resilient, being who I am, I took it to the task, and I'm doing it. And the way I'm doing it is like having all the corn. A lot of the corn that I have growing, you see behind me, even at the end of the season, that was all white corn. I started introducing corn that was indigenous to the area. I started growing and teaching people how to actually utilize this corn in their everyday diets. Our ground down here, a lot of it was clay-based, so how to rejuvenate that clay, how to get some more humus and stuff like that inside there. Then I had to do clay pot irrigation because it's hot. We don't want to water all the time, so clay pot irrigation is what I introduced down here, what we do back home, to make our plants and our gardens look great in the summertime. And if you look at it, it looks nice. Such a nice garden. And especially for resilience down here, for me, I work with 7 Indigenous youth. I started doing it this year. It's me teaching them how to get back to our roots on gardening, how we can be resilient, how we can rise and take our gardening to the next level and showcase it around the world. And I also show people down here that I don't just grow crops that are just known for Native American crops or European crops. I have one section down here where I'm reintroducing back the groundnut and even growing some rice down here as well. Because rice, everyone eats it around the world. Why do we have to have it coming from other places? Why not grow it? If we can grow it here in Canada, let's grow it here in Canada, see what we can do. So we started doing that last year. That was a big hit. Did it again this year, and it was, COVID kind of slowed everything down, but that's totally fine. My garden was a little bit late this year, but when you look at it, you can't tell that it was late. She bounced up and did what she had to do to make sure she nourished the rest of the nature inside here, the people that come by here. Being resilient, this garden is it right here. This garden's all about being resilient in the middle of a colonial society that is trying to keep us down and not allow us to be the people that we were supposed to be. I mean, like I said before, me just being here is resilient. I am Black and Indigenous. I'm not supposed to be existing right now, but I am. And now that I'm here existing, I'm going to showcase to people how to be resilient, how to take back the food source, and actually come together and work it all together as well. All right?
Incredible. Thank you. What a great note to end this conversation. So I have the real privilege of having a couple of minutes to kind of kick off a discussion, and then I'll be taking some questions from the chat. So thank you for those who sent them in. I want to just jump right into it. And I have you here talking to you, Isaac. So I'd love to start with you. Like many, as I'm seeing in the chat, really inspired by your approach and your kind of like pushback to really ensure that there was recognition and space for Indigenous leadership, Indigenous ways, and approaches. So can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to push back some strategies and to understand how others might be able to show that kind of leadership? And more specifically, I'd love to hear about are there other thoughts you have about how to build more Indigenous leadership or create space, because we know there's Indigenous leadership. It's not about building it, it's about creating the space for Indigenous leadership in urban agriculture.
Okay, so I'll start with the first one. How do I go about getting the change down here? Well, here's one thing everyone should know about me. I don't take no as the final answer. You may say no to me once, but I will find a different way to get to the result that I'm looking for. So I don't take no. You say no to me, nah, I'll keep going, because it's what you're doing is right. What I'm doing is right. The first time someone says no to me, I always say, oh, you're saying no out of fear, because you're afraid of changing. Trust me, this change is going to be good. So try to find an A, B, and C selection or way to go about and getting what you need to get done. And when you do it, lay everything out. Make sure you have a paper to back you up. Write everything down. Show them what you're going to do. But do not take no as the final answer. Be persistent, especially when it comes to our food, being resilient in food. We must be persistent. What was your next question again? Sorry. It was...
The next question is really about, like, how do we create more space for Indigenous leadership?
Okay, so how do we create more space? Well, this year I worked with NDG. I worked with seven Indigenous youth who are going to become the future leaders within the Indigenous community. So we need to have more programs like that, where we are being specific to Indigenous cultures. We're being specific to Black culture as well, to get the youth to be the leaders. Because we, who are old enough, who are the leaders now, need to realize that we won't be the leaders forever. So we have to open up space and make these spaces for the youth to come forward. And we also, the biggest thing that we have to do, seeing that's who are older, that we have to listen to the youth. They are going to cause the change that we are seeking. We just plant the seed in the youth. They will cause the change. So we have to listen. And one of our biggest problems is that we don't listen. We think we know it all. We don't. We don't at all. Especially, like, we should realize now that COVID has shown us that we don't know it all. That we have to step back and rethink a lot of stuff before we move forward.
Thank you, Isaac. So I want to bring it over to Karen and Alice for this next question. And I really appreciated Isaac was clear and brief so that we make the most of the time. So, Alice talked about the digital divide and the challenge to connect with vulnerable residents when only there's like a digital way of connecting. Karen talked about the need to take the reins and organize people, using tactics like webinars to figure out what people need to be able to bring the city on board. Can you tell us, Karen and Alice, what were the kind of like things that you feel like you had in place that allowed you to pivot so quickly to support communities? What were the kind of like the pillars that you had in your work that really allowed you to be able to build community and support in this way? Maybe we'll start with Karen, and then I'll turn it over to to you, Alice.
Oh, definitely it's community organizing. I mean, usually gardeners are resilient because it's more than just growing food. It's looking at the intersection that food has had in so many social issues, such as health, such as economics, such as land, such as education. And so we've been organizing within social spaces for so long. So it was easy. It was easy to say, okay, let's come together. You know, we're going to build more. We're going to grow more food to feed our families. And again, being somewhat trailblazers, you know, especially when you're growing food in municipalities and you got rules and regulations, they always tell you what you can't do. And it's like, wait a second, what you cannot do. It's like, no, we can do. And so coming together with our organizing skills and say, you know what, we're going to fight this pandemic by collectively working together.
Amazing. Alice?
I think the thing that enabled us to pivot really quickly and react to what was needed was our locality, so being right next to where the need was. So, yeah, being right in the city, having the food right next door to the people who most needed it, and then having ways of getting it to them. So the support of organisations that helped us to get it to them. So with us, it was Barking and Dagenham Council and Growing Communities Stock Scheme. So they were critical.
Really great. So I'm actually going to turn it over, and I'm drawing on some of the things that were raised in the questions here. But you know, I think what was really astounding about some of the things you shared, not only your philosophy, but specifically Jessie, is, you know, as a business, as a model that's supporting many people, that's growing and expanding in this moment. Can you tell us about creative approaches you've had to funding? So Jessie, I'm wondering if you can tell us, like, how you've been able to creatively fund, you know, you talked a little bit about how you supported community at the same time as having a viable business, because I think that's, you know, a real, something we can show people. You don't have to be, you know, folks can do this on their own.
Yeah, and that's a very important piece when I first started, was to initially look at starting, even my mentors were actually who made me think this way, is start small enough to grow, and whatever ceiling you get to, you add to it, but you learn by going small. So it was a difficult and still a difficult journey, because what I have to learn is to live with enough. And I'm not trying to make this business a multi-million-dollar business, because that's not it. The goal is to, this year was to prove that urban farming as a business is viable in the city of Toronto. And that with, I love what Karen was talking about mobilizing the community, because that is the vein that keeps this system going. We cannot, and I cannot, now will shut down my business tomorrow if I go full commercial and it's all about advertising and trying to get people that, all that. It's about mobilizing the community who can support, and all those 70 members that I mentioned earlier are kindred spirits. You know, these are individuals who love about rehabilitation of the city. They're keen about, you know, land usage and, you know, the communities that they're involved in, vulnerable population. They're very keen on that. And them supporting what I do, I have the funding that I received from that pocket. I take about maybe 20-30% of it, and I move it into the community. So it's about living with enough. That's a journey that I had to come to, where I know how much I need just to keep the business going. But any extra that comes from that, we move it in. We move into a community. Like, for example, when COVID hit, we actually had to close down our membership sign up because it was flooding over and above what we can grow for. So within that same light, we were thinking, hey, our community needs a lot of support. So we needed to move quite a bit of produce. So we partnered with Food Share Toronto, which is an organization that works really closely with our communities. And we started moving copious amounts of food to them. And they have a very neat distribution network. So we're leaning on them for that. And all we do now is focus on farming and everything we're doing. And any excess we have, we send it there. And this is not like broken, spent produce. This is still legitimate, what I just harvested. There's some that go here to those who are paying for it, but the same produce have it the same day goes into a low-income community subsidized by us. So we take quote unquote a loss on it, but it's not really because our CSA supports us. So the stronger community base is, the stronger our participation in our community is. That's the formula we're using.
Thanks, Jesse. So I wanted to pose the last question before doing a quick round and then closing our panel to Mark and to Killoran, really about kind of wanting to hear a little bit more about, in this moment, reflecting on this moment, how do you feel gardeners can contribute to solutions to close the gap of racial inequality, address issues like food insecurity? Many of you are working in neighborhoods where folks are really struggling, depressed neighborhoods where we need to build folks up. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see urban gardeners playing a role in building solutions, whether that's through innovative partnerships. We heard about Karen and kind of the longstanding partnerships with the botanical gardens and other folks. We had some people in the chat ask about mental health. So I'd love to hear briefly your thoughts, each of you, on that. Maybe we can start with Mark and then Killoran.
Muted, Mark.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, obviously our membership in Phoenix is maybe, and Natalie and I see a couple members on the participant list, is maybe 80% Black, 20% white. And I'm obviously white, I identify as white. So we do a lot of internal work on kind of what that means, kind of how to work effectively together in the community, how to address inequalities within our group. So there's an internal piece to that. We have about 40 members, which is a significant number of people. And then, for me, it's just learning how to take leadership from people of color. How to be helpful, how to be a good ally, kind of being open and questioning and humble. I think that's a major thing. And it's going to look different. Every garden, every community is different. So I don't know that there's one way to do it. It all depends on where you are and how you can be helpful in that immediate moment and also long term.
Thank you. Killoran?
So many thoughts on that, but I think at this point, I think like one of the speakers already said, stopping and listening to what is needed right now. And for us, we had a look at us as an organisation and looking at how we are still mostly white, and part of reframing our focus and working together with more organisations is looking at how we're creating jobs and training and reaching young people and Black people of colour in the area who have all the food growing skills and need access to jobs. The other thing I was going to say was, so many people in our area are amazing food growers already. The biggest issue in central London and in an area like King's Cross is access to land. We're on a piece of land that we're leasing, and we've only got it for a short amount of time. But I think there's a lot of work. I know that Sarah is working on this, but putting pressure on the local authorities to support this effort and this movement to get Black and people of colour who have the food growing knowledge, who want the access to land, to help open up those spaces and get access to land, I think is what was mentioned.
Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge we're a couple minutes over, but this has been such an incredible conversation. I don't want to end it. We are recording and we'll be posting this to the NYC Parks GreenThumb website, so you'll be able to watch in full there. And if there are some questions that haven't been answered, there might be an opportunity for us to respond to those via that email that's sent out to folks who have registered. So I just want to ask one final question, a quick 1 or 2 words from each of the panelists, and then we'll wrap up with a big thank you to our incredible hosts for this session. So the last question I wanted to throw to everyone with a really brief response is, in this moment, in your incredible community-based work, all of the knowledge you've shared here, what's been the biggest learning that you'd like to share with folks who are tuning in, who are gardeners themselves, who are interested in advancing justice work, racial justice work around food insecurity, around climate challenges? Can you tell us what's the kind of one learning that you've taken from this that you want to share with them? I'm going to start with, perhaps I'll start with Alice, and then I'll do, we'll start with the UK, NYC, and then we'll go to Toronto.
Hey, so you cut out slightly on the last bit of that, so I'm really sorry, but could you repeat the last?
Yeah, absolutely. So really just, the kind of nugget of learning from working in this moment with communities in need to advance, racial justice, climate justice, address challenges of food insecurity. What's kind of the one piece of learning you want to share with gardeners and folks tuning in about what you've taken from the moment?
Sure. Yeah, so as a grower, in terms of like the plants around me, it's something that I've been learning over the years to respond to the context I'm in directly with the plants, but in a broader sense, like it's really opened my eyes to the community around me, like really right around me, and community I hadn't necessarily engaged with or noticed before. So I think, yeah, having that consciousness of who's around us and who needs us and what we might have to offer, and going from there and listening.
Yeah, for me, I guess it sounds quite obvious, but working more closely and together with other services in the area, like youth centres and the community centre, the schools, and the food bank, that's all a really big part of creating a resilient food system. I think if we're working together and we're actually more efficient that way, less people are falling through the cracks, and we have a healthier local area, and social justice is at the forefront. And then from there, then we can look at our climate justice, environmental justice, but working together and creating a healthy, resilient food system that looks after everyone is the biggest learning for me.
Shall I jump in? Great. So I suppose one. Am I UK contingent, Milena? Yeah. Great. I'd love to chip in about my learning during this time. I think for me, I just see how rich and how diverse our food growing community is, and overlook urban growing at your peril, because I think for a long time it's been seen as a bit of a nice to have, sort of the soft end of the food systems work that we do. And I think in a crisis we've shown just how we can rise, and just how important that connection with open space, open land food growing is. And I think it's really interesting to think about lots of conversations that are being had about, are the right people at the table? And actually I'm starting to think, are we sitting around the right table in the first place? And maybe some of our diverse communities and our people of colour have actually got, a better table that we can sit around and start to think about how we really want our systems and our communities to work in the future. So that's where I'm at. I want to come and sit at someone else's table, please.
Great. I'm going to throw it over to folks in NYC, maybe starting with Mark and then Karen.
Unmute myself. At Phoenix, we have a tradition of closing every meeting with a word. We just do a circle and people just say a word. And so I'm just going to close with a word after having said all of that. And my word is listen. Thank you.
In many communities of color, they call us poor and marginalized, but we're strong and resilient people. This country was built on the backs of enslaved people and indigenous people. So remember, growing food is a statement of power.
Oh, I love it. Bill, I don't know if you want to contribute as well.
Just very quickly, I want to thank Karen and Mark, of course, for everything that they're doing, but I would say that my work in communities is certainly working with gardeners during COVID, and watching this has been humbling. And I think my big takeaway is to continue listening and to continue learning and to continue talking with our gardeners who are on the front lines doing the real work that matters. So my door remains open to find out how we can be better allies in supporting you in a better way.
Great. Jesse and Isaac?
I love what Mark said, that is just brilliant. Listen, it has saved me so many hours just by listening and learning. And one of the things I tell anyone who comes to me asking me, what can I do? Can I farm like you as farming? I repeat the same thing. Start by listening to your community and build on that network, build on that understanding. And after you do that, start building your soil. And only then is when you start farming. Until you have those two in check, don't even start. So understanding community, listening, by listening first and then working on your soil is perfect. So I said too much, but thank you so much for that.
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. So it's all about us working together. I mean, we have been divided for far too long in this society. And it's going to take all of us across the board to work together to get us to where we need to be. Either we're going to have more urban gardens, more indigenous gardens, or just more gardens, period. It's going to take all of us. We can't let them divide us anymore. The more we're divided, the more we're going to stay where we are and think we're all ready to move on. That's my words.
Rhonda, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I'm going to follow Mark's lead. Ditto on everything that everyone has said, but 3 words in particular: humility, listening, and relationships. Those are all the things that came through loud and clear this year.
Incredible. I probably, like many of you, have been so much gratitude to the incredible speakers who shared their knowledge, their experience, underscoring their challenges, and has kind of provided a really inspiring vision of how growers are powerful, how resilient and knowledgeable and at the forefront communities of color are: Black, Indigenous, racialized folks, low-income folks who know what they need, and that reminding us all we just need to create the space and listen. I really want to thank our hosts for this meeting, Capital Growth and Sustain, NYC Parks GreenThumb, and also Toronto Urban Growers for just having the vision to bring folks together to learn from each other. And I want to thank all of you for asking incredible questions, being engaged on the chat, and really just reaching out to support each other. I think more than ever, we really need to look to how we can continue to work together to face the challenges, because that's the only way we're going to move forward. Just to close, I want to we heard at the beginning, there are some incredible events happening by our hosts to continue this discussion. So for those of you who enjoyed that, please check out Sustained. I think that there might be a slide that shows some of the stuff they have up going on, but this is the start of 10 days of activities they're launching with their Urban Harvest Festival that's taking place September 19th from 10 to 5 p.m. We have also Toronto Urban Growers, which is also in just the heat of our Urban Agriculture Week here, and there's a ton of events. There's actually an event happening tomorrow, the Best in Grow TO, from 11 to 3 p.m. at Fred Johnson Park. So check out UA Week online on their website to see all the details and the many events coming. And of course, we have GreenThumb, who has their 41st Harvest Festival fair that's taking place on September 26th from 10 to 1 p.m. virtually, learning more about the incredible, inspiring, community-driven gardens and movement that's happening in New York. So I just want to once again thank everyone, and for those who had to cut out, not to worry, we'll be sharing this recorded webinar with you via email and on the GreenThumb's website. Thanks, everyone.